Imagine for a moment that everything you ever believed about yourself, the clean record you proudly carry, the life you think is ordinary and unremarkable is as simple as it seems. Picture someone, somewhere, silently flipping through the pages of your life, reading between the lines, seeing marks you never knew existed. What if the story they see is entirely different from the one you tell yourself? Tonight, we are going to peel back the curtain on the invisible forces shaping our identities, the hidden judgments lurking behind so-called clean records, and the unseen power that decides who stays unnoticed and who becomes interesting. Stay with me, because what you are about to discover isn't just about systems or files. It's about perception, control, and the quiet truths that can change everything you thought you knew. If you want, I can also rewrite this intro in a more theatrical, dark, Joker style tone that matches the full speech vibe to hook the audience even stronger. Do you want me to do that? The illusion of a clean record begins with a comforting belief that a person's life can be reduced to a tidy summary, stamped and approved by an official system. Most people assume that clean simply means no arrests, no charges, no convictions. It feels binary: either you have done something wrong or you haven't. But that definition belongs to the public narrative, not the private machinery that evaluates individuals behind closed doors. In reality, a record is rarely empty. Even when it appears spotless, it is layered with data points, addresses, employment history, financial patterns, travel logs, digital footprints. A clean criminal record does not mean an absence of information. It means an absence of visible punishment. The illusion lies in confusing silence with invisibility. Just because there is no public stain does not mean there are no private annotations. Society reinforces this illusion by rewarding the concept of being clean. Job applications ask about convictions. Rental agreements request background checks. Institutions present these screenings as objective measures of safety and trustworthiness. The message is clear: if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. But this logic oversimplifies how modern systems interpret data. Risk assessments, algorithmic flags, and intelligence notes do not require guilt to exist. They operate on patterns, probabilities, and associations. A person may never commit a crime and still appear in databases due to proximity, geographical, digital, or social, to someone else under scrutiny. An online interaction, a shared address, or even attendance at certain events can become a data point. These fragments do not prove wrongdoing, yet they contribute to a profile. The individual continues believing in their clean record, unaware that the definition of clean has expanded beyond legality into predictability and classification. The illusion is powerful because it provides psychological comfort. It assures people that behavior alone determines their standing. Follow the rules, avoid trouble, and you remain untouched. However, modern record keeping is less about recording past actions and more about mapping potential futures. Information is stored not only to document what happened, but to anticipate what might. Thus, a clean record is not a blank page. It is a curated surface. Beneath it may lie layers of interpretation, context, and silent evaluation. The danger is not necessarily in the existence of data, but in the assumption that absence of accusation equals absence of scrutiny. The reality of a surveillance state is not always dramatic or obvious. It does not necessarily arrive with sirens, agents in dark suits, or microphones hidden in lamps. Instead, it exists quietly, embedded in ordinary systems people use every day. The idea that a background check is simply a quick scan for criminal history is comforting but incomplete. In many cases, what is described as routine verification is supported by vast networks of interconnected databases that extend far beyond court records. Modern surveillance is built on data aggregation, financial transactions, travel bookings, social media activity, phone metadata, biometric identifiers, and even browsing habits contribute to digital profiles. When a name is entered into a system, it can trigger connections across multiple layers of information. Some of these layers are accessible to law enforcement, others to intelligence agencies, and some through partnerships between public and private institutions. The background check becomes less about confirming past wrongdoing and more about assessing patterns, associations, and perceived risk. What makes this reality significant is its normalization. Surveillance infrastructure often expands gradually, justified by national security, crime prevention, or public safety. Each addition appears reasonable in isolation: more cameras to reduce theft, more data sharing to prevent fraud, more monitoring to counter threats. Over time, however, these systems interlock. The result is an environment where observation is continuous, even if invisible. Individuals may never feel watched directly, yet their data is persistently collected, stored, and analyzed. Another aspect of this reality is automation. Algorithms assist in sorting and flagging information, identifying anomalies or connections that humans might overlook. These systems do not rely solely on evidence of crimes. They evaluate probabilities. Being associated with certain locations, networks, or keywords can generate attention. Importantly, the individual is rarely informed when such attention occurs. There is no notification that a file was opened, no alert that a note was added. The process is silent and procedural. The distinction between surveillance and suspicion also becomes blurred. In a surveillance state, monitoring does not necessarily imply guilt. It is often preventative, speculative, or precautionary. The system observes first and interprets later. For the average person, this means that a simple background check may intersect with broader intelligence frameworks, even if no wrongdoing exists. The reality is not necessarily constant active targeting, but rather a persistent capability to access, cross-reference, and evaluate personal data at scale. Creating a structure where observation is built into the foundation of governance, rather than reserved for exceptional circumstances. The concept of invisible marks of power revolves around the idea that influence does not always need to be loud or publicly declared to be effective. In bureaucratic and institutional systems, the smallest annotation, a flag, a code, a brief internal note can carry consequences far greater than its size suggests. These marks are often unseen by the person they concern, yet they shape decisions in hiring, security clearances, travel permissions, financial approvals, and more. Their power lies not in spectacle, but in subtlety. An invisible mark may not state that someone is guilty or dangerous. It may simply indicate that the person warrants further review, additional verification, or heightened awareness. Such language sounds neutral, even procedural. However, within systems driven by risk management, neutrality can quietly shift outcomes. A file marked for extra attention may be routed differently, reviewed more critically, or subjected to additional scrutiny. Over time, this pattern of cautious evaluation can alter opportunities without ever producing a formal accusation. These marks represent authority exercised indirectly. Instead of overt punishment, there is quiet classification. Institutions rely on categorization to manage large populations efficiently. Labels and internal codes allow them to sort individuals into groups: low risk, moderate risk, unknown variable. Once placed in a category, even tentatively, a person's interactions with the system may subtly change. The individual remains unaware, continuing life as usual, while decisions behind the scenes are influenced by that classification. What makes invisible marks powerful is the asymmetry of knowledge. The institution knows the mark exists, the individual does not. This imbalance limits the ability to challenge or correct potential misunderstandings. If an error occurs or context is missing, there may be no clear avenue for appeal, because the mark itself is not publicly acknowledged. Power in this sense is exercised through opacity. It shapes reality without announcing its presence. Invisible marks also reflect the modern emphasis on predictive governance. Rather than responding solely to confirmed events, institutions anticipate possibilities. A subtle notation can represent uncertainty rather than wrongdoing, yet uncertainty alone can justify caution. Over time, repeated layers of cautious decisions accumulate, forming an invisible barrier. The effectiveness of such marks depends on their discretion. If every annotation were visible and contestable, their influence would be diluted. Their strength lies in remaining internal, procedural, and unspoken, quietly gutting outcomes while preserving the outward appearance of neutrality and fairness. Control through information is rooted in the understanding that knowledge about individuals can be as powerful as authority over them. In earlier eras, control was often exercised through visible force laws strictly enforced, physical barriers erected, overt punishments delivered. In the modern landscape, influence frequently operates through data. The collection, organization, and interpretation of information allow institutions to anticipate behavior, shape decisions, and limit possibilities without direct confrontation. Information creates leverage. When systems possess detailed records about a person, as habits, associations, financial patterns, travel history, and communication networks, they gain the ability to map that person as life with remarkable precision. This mapping does not automatically imply malicious intent, but it does create a structural advantage. The side that knows more holds the stronger position. Decisions can be tailored, access can be granted or restricted, and scrutiny can be intensified based on what the data suggests. Control through information also relies on asymmetry. Individuals typically have limited visibility into what is stored about them, how it is interpreted, or how long it is retained. Meanwhile, institutions can cross-reference multiple sources in seconds. This imbalance means that responses to a person's actions are often informed by context the individual does not know exists. A denied application, delayed approval, or additional review may stem from patterns detected in data analytics rather than any explicit wrongdoing. Predictive analysis strengthens this form of control. Rather than focusing solely on past actions, systems evaluate probabilities. Algorithms identify trends and correlations, assigning risk scores or generating alerts when certain thresholds are met. These predictions influence how individuals are treated. Extra verification steps, targeted questioning, or restricted access can all emerge from statistical inference. The person involved may never know that a predictive model contributed to the outcome. Information also shapes narratives. Data can frame someone as stable, unreliable, compliant, or suspicious, depending on how it is interpreted. The framing itself guides decision-making processes. Once a narrative is established within a file, subsequent evaluations may unconsciously align with that narrative, reinforcing it over time. Unlike overt coercion, informational control is subtle. It does not need to silence or intimidate directly. Instead, it channels behavior by structuring opportunities and constraints. People adapt to systems that evaluate them, often adjusting their actions in anticipation of how data might be perceived. In this way, information does not merely record reality, it participates in shaping it, quietly guiding choices and outcomes through structured awareness and unseen evaluation. The fear of the unknown file emerges from uncertainty rather than evidence. It is not necessarily rooted in confirmed surveillance or proven misconduct, but in the possibility that somewhere, beyond public visibility, a record exists that tells a story about you that you have never read. This fear is psychological as much as structural. When people know that systems collect and store data about them, yet have little access to that data, imagination fills the gaps. An unknown file represents a narrative constructed without participation. It may contain fragments, addresses, timestamps, associations, algorithmic scores, internal notes assembled into a profile. Even if each fragment is neutral on its own, together they can imply patterns. The individual does not know how these pieces are interpreted, what weight they carry, or who has the authority to review them. The lack of transparency transforms ordinary data into something ominous. This fear intensifies because modern record-keeping is persistent. Information can remain stored indefinitely, archived long after its original context fades. A past association, a misunderstood online comment, or proximity to an investigated individual might sit quietly in a database. Without insight into how long such information is retained or how it is evaluated, people may worry that a minor or irrelevant detail could resurface unexpectedly. The unknown file also challenges the sense of control over personal identity. Most individuals believe they define themselves through their actions and choices. However, if unseen records contribute to how institutions perceive and treat them, identity becomes partially shaped by hidden classification. A person may feel confident in their public image while wondering whether an internal label contradicts it. Psychologically, uncertainty often produces more anxiety than confirmed information. If someone is accused of wrongdoing openly, they can respond, defend, or correct the record. When the file is invisible, there is no clear path to clarification. The absence of knowledge prevents resolution. It creates a persistent question: what does the system think of me? This fear does not require constant paranoia to exist. It can linger quietly, surfacing during moments like job applications, travel screenings, or security checks. The individual stands before a process that evaluates them using criteria they cannot fully see. The unknown file becomes a symbol of unseen judgment, silent, procedural, and potentially consequential, existing somewhere beyond reach, shaping outcomes without direct confrontation or explanation. The duality of government agencies reflects the layered structure of authority within modern states. On the surface, agencies often have clearly defined roles. One may focus on domestic law enforcement, another on foreign intelligence, another on regulatory oversight. These distinctions create an appearance of separation and balance, suggesting that each entity operates within its own boundaries. However, beneath this formal structure lies a complex network of coordination, data sharing, and overlapping mandates. This duality becomes evident when considering how information flows. A domestic agency may collect data for criminal investigations, while an intelligence agency gathers information related to national security. In theory, these domains are distinct: crime versus threat, internal versus external. In practice, the lines can blur. A single individual as data may pass through multiple systems, evaluated under different frameworks. What begins as routine administrative information in one context may gain strategic significance in another. The phrase, "one hand checks, the other hand already knows," captures the perception that while one agency conducts an official review, another may already hold background intelligence. This does not necessarily imply misconduct. It reflects institutional design. Governments create specialized bodies to handle different risks, and coordination is often justified as necessary for efficiency and security. Yet to an individual, this interconnectedness can feel opaque. The process appears singular, but the review may draw upon multiple layers of authority. Duality also exists in purpose. Law enforcement agencies typically respond to completed actions, focusing on evidence and prosecution. Intelligence agencies often operate preemptively, analyzing patterns and signals to anticipate potential threats. When these approaches intersect, a person may be assessed not only for what they have done, but for what they might represent. The shift from reactive to predictive evaluation introduces ambiguity into how individuals are categorized. Institutional duality can create both safeguards and concerns. On one hand, distributing responsibilities among agencies can prevent excessive concentration of power. On the other, coordination mechanisms can consolidate influence in less visible ways. Oversight structures may exist, but they are often complex and difficult for the public to navigate or fully understand. For the individual, the duality of agencies reinforces the sense that evaluation is multi-layered. An inquiry may not be confined to a single perspective or database. Instead, it may involve intersecting systems, each interpreting the same information through its own lens, creating a composite assessment shaped by overlapping authorities and shared intelligence frameworks. Identity versus classification highlights the tension between how individuals understand themselves and how institutions define them. Personal identity is complex, shaped by experiences, intentions, relationships, values, and growth over time. It includes context, nuance, and the capacity for change. Classification, by contrast, simplifies. It reduces a person to categories, codes, risk levels, or demographic markers in order to make large systems manageable and efficient. Institutions rely on classification because scale demands it. Governments, corporations, and organizations process vast numbers of people daily. To function, they create structured categories: employed or unemployed, citizen or non-citizen, low risk or high risk, compliant or non-compliant. These labels allow systems to make decisions quickly. However, in translating a person into data points, complexity is compressed. Individual stories are distilled into attributes that fit predefined boxes. The tension arises when classification begins to influence opportunities and treatment. An algorithm might assign a risk score based on patterns that correlate statistically with certain outcomes. That score does not capture motivations, personal growth, or unique circumstances. It reflects probabilities derived from aggregated data. Yet once assigned, the classification can guide decisions whether an application receives additional scrutiny, whether benefits are approved, or whether monitoring increases. Identity is dynamic. Classification is often static. A person may evolve, correct past mistakes, or move into new environments, but institutional records may not update at the same pace or with the same depth. A past association or outdated data point can linger, shaping perceptions long after circumstances have changed. The individual experiences themselves as multidimensional and adaptive, while the system interacts with a snapshot. Another aspect of this tension is invisibility. People typically know how they see themselves but may not know how they are categorized behind the scenes. A file might contain internal labels or predictive indicators that the individual never sees. This gap creates an imbalance in understanding. The person believes they are being evaluated as a whole human being, while the system processes them as structured data. Classification is not inherently malicious. It is a tool for organization and efficiency. However, when classifications become decisive without transparency or contextual interpretation, they can overshadow personal identity. The result is a quiet shift in power, where the narrative written in data competes with the narrative lived in reality, shaping outcomes through structured definitions rather than personal understanding. Paranoia versus truth explores the fragile boundary between irrational suspicion and legitimate concern. In environments where surveillance capabilities and data collection systems are widely acknowledged, it becomes difficult to distinguish exaggerated fear from plausible reality. Paranoia is typically defined as unfounded or excessive mistrust, a belief that one is being watched or targeted without sufficient evidence. Truth, on the other hand, rests on verifiable facts. The complication rises when elements of both coexist. Modern societies openly recognize the presence of monitoring systems, security cameras in public spaces, digital tracking through online platforms, data retention policies within institutions. Because these practices are real, a baseline level of awareness is rational. Individuals know that certain activities generate records. However, without transparency about the scope, interpretation, and use of that data, imagination can extend beyond what is demonstrably occurring. The absence of clear boundaries allows uncertainty to expand. Paranoia often feeds on ambiguity. When a person cannot see what information is stored about them or how it is analyzed, they may begin to speculate about hidden motives or secret designation. Small coincidences, an unexpected delay, additional questioning. A denied request can feel significant. Without access to the reasoning behind decisions, people may attribute outcomes to unseen scrutiny. In some cases, these suspicions may be unfounded. In others, they may partially reflect real processes that are simply opaque. Truth in such contexts is layered. It may be true that data is collected and cross-referenced. It may also be true that most individuals are not actively singled out beyond automated systems. Both realities can coexist. The challenge is that individuals rarely have the information necessary to calibrate their concerns accurately. Overestimating scrutiny leads to paranoia. Underestimating it leads to complacency. Psychologically, humans are wired to detect patterns, even when none exist. In an information-rich environment, this tendency intensifies. At the same time, history provides examples of surveillance practices that were once dismissed as unlikely but later confirmed. This historical memory complicates efforts to dismiss all suspicion as irrational. The boundary between paranoia and truth is therefore not fixed. It shifts depending on transparency, oversight, and public understanding. When systems operate with limited visibility, uncertainty expands. In that uncertainty, rational awareness and exaggerated fear can blur, creating a space where suspicion feels both questionable and disturbingly plausible at the same time. Power without accountability refers to authority exercised in ways that are difficult to question, challenge, or even detect. In structured systems, especially those dealing with security or intelligence, decisions may be made through internal processes that are shielded from public view. While oversight mechanisms often exist in theory, their complexity or limited transparency can make them inaccessible to the average person. When individuals are affected by decisions but cannot trace how or why those decisions were made, power operates at a distance from scrutiny. Accountability typically requires visibility. For a decision to be challenged, the reasoning behind it must be known. In many bureaucratic environments, however, determinations are framed as procedural outcomes rather than discretionary judgments. A file is flagged, an application is delayed, or additional screening is triggered. These actions may be justified internally by policies or algorithms, yet the person affected may receive only a generic explanation, if any at all. The absence of detailed reasoning restricts meaningful appeal. Institutional secrecy is often defended as necessary for security or efficiency. Revealing criteria, risk indicators, or intelligence methods could compromise operation. While this rationale can be valid in specific contexts, it also creates a space where decisions influence lives without reciprocal transparency. When individuals cannot access their records, understand their classifications, or correct inaccuracies, authority becomes insulated from direct feedback. Automation further complicates accountability. Algorithms may generate risk scores or recommendations based on statistical correlations. If a decision is influenced by such systems, responsibility becomes diffused. Officials may rely on automated outputs, while designers of the system may not oversee individual cases. The chain of responsibility becomes difficult to pinpoint. This diffusion can make it challenging to determine who is answerable for errors or unintended consequences. Power without accountability does not necessarily imply malicious intent. It can arise from structural design, where efficiency and secrecy are prioritized. However, even well-intentioned systems can produce outcomes that feel arbitrary or unjust when transparency is limited. Individuals may sense that decisions affecting their employment, travel, or opportunities are shaped by unseen factors they cannot confront. The imbalance lies in the one-sided nature of evaluation. Institutions observe, record, and categorize, while individuals often remain unaware of how they are being interpreted. Without accessible mechanisms for explanation and correction, authority functions in a largely self-contained loop, influencing outcomes while remaining partially insulated from those it affects. Society, as false sense of security, is rooted in the comforting but misleading belief that compliance and transparency guarantee protection from scrutiny. People are often reassured that as long as they follow laws, avoid criminal activity, and maintain a clean public record, they are safe from surveillance, investigation, or institutional attention. This belief simplifies the complex reality of modern information systems, where being legally innocent does not necessarily equate to being invisible or unmonitored. The perception of safety becomes a social construct reinforced by cultural narratives, media portrayals, and institutional messaging, creating a collective sense of order that may not fully correspond to reality. Modern systems of monitoring and data collection operate continuously, often without explicit notification. Cameras, sensors, digital records, metadata, and algorithmic analysis contribute to a persistent awareness of individual behaviors. Compliance may reduce certain risks, such as arrest or prosecution, but it does not eliminate observation. Agencies and organizations can maintain profiles, cross-reference behavior, and flag individuals for additional scrutiny based on patterns rather than actual infractions. Therefore, the appearance of a clean record provides reassurance but may obscure ongoing evaluation or classification that the individual cannot see or control. False security also arises from the reliance on conventional indicators of innocence. Background checks, identity verifications, and legal documentation are treated as definitive proof that someone is unremarkable or low risk. However, these measures capture only a subset of what systems consider relevant. Associations, patterns of communication, digital behavior, travel histories, and even predictive modeling can influence how a person is perceived within institutional frameworks. The public, unaware of these additional layers, interprets the absence of visible consequences as safety, even when invisible mechanisms are actively monitoring or assessing them. Psychologically, this false sense of security has profound effects. It encourages trust in institutions, allowing individuals to act openly, make commitments, and engage socially without constant self-censorship. At the same time, it creates vulnerability because the same openness that feels safe can generate data points that feed into monitoring systems. People may overestimate the protection that legality and compliance provide, assuming that systems operate purely on proven wrongdoing rather than broader criteria of interest, pattern recognition, or predictive evaluation. Ultimately, society's sense of security is shaped as much by perception as by law or policy. The reassurance of being clean is comforting, but it does not account for unseen classifications, internal flags, or the anticipatory logic of modern institutions. Individuals may navigate life with confidence, believing that innocence shields them, while unseen processes quietly observe, record, and influence outcomes in ways that conventional understanding does not anticipate. In conclusion, what we often perceive as a clean record is rarely as simple as it appears. Beneath the surface, layers of observation, classification, and silent evaluation shape how institutions view us. A single mark, an unseen annotation, or a predictive assessment can quietly influence opportunities, decisions, and perceptions without ever surfacing in public records. The systems of modern governance and intelligence operate in ways that blend reality and uncertainty, creating a world where the line between safety and scrutiny is thin, where identity and classification coexist uneasily, and where knowledge itself becomes power. Understanding this reality is not meant to instill fear, but to illuminate the hidden mechanics that quietly shape the world around us, reminding us that what is visible is never the full story. Good luck to each of you as you navigate your own paths with awareness, insight, and resilience. Thank you for listening and for daring to question the systems and structures that operate behind the scenes. Your curiosity is the first step toward clarity and understanding.